Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Unpacking with Sarah. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, and I am excited to be here with you today to talk a little bit more about flexible thinking. And today we're going to talk about the scientific method. So, when I get on my phone and I look up what are the steps in the scientific method, the first thing that comes up, let me put this on AI overview. So, AI did this is the scientific method is a research method that has evolved over centuries of debate about how to understand the natural world. Scientists may modify the scientific method when direct experimentation isn't possible. And I love that last sentence about we can modify the scientific method when direct experimentation isn't possible. And what I want to talk about today is when we are working on flexible thinking and relationships, especially, experimentation can be kind of dangerous. Like, we don't want to experiment in our relationships in a way of understanding the why our partners are doing certain things or why our children are doing certain things. Now, there is a time and place for experimentation, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But first, we really want to try and challenge ourselves to stay in reality based thinking. We're really good at mind reading and guessing, hey, my partner is doing this because of this. But we're doing that based on all these cognitive filters that are in place in our brain that tell us that our opinion and our thoughts are true and theirs are not. And so this is when we get in trouble, when we start fighting and we start telling our partner what they meant or what their intent was without really understanding their worldview. Brene Brown talks about giving people the benefit of the doubt and just stating they're doing the best they can with what they have. And I would say that that's true. Most people are doing the best they know how to do with the skills and the tools that they have at that time. And sometimes people's best is really sucky for us. I would say that in my life, my parents did the best damn job they knew how to do at the time while they were raising me, and their best was still a Oh, my camera just went crazy. All right. So my parents did. Let me just back up since I lost some sound there, it looks like, for a second. My parents probably did, and I'm guessing that they did the best damn job they knew how to do with the skills and tools that they had during their lives, during their time period, and during their own, because of their own traumas and challenges in life. However, their best still was abusive, manipulative, and very narcissistic. It was very riddled with personality disorder. And I talk about that in my book, Trauma Bonded, that you can buy wherever books are sold right up here. And so I really want to talk about let's move our hypothesis in our thinking. As we're trying to understand our behaviors and the behaviors of others, including our children, we need to do a lot more data collecting before we formulate a hypothesis. So when I go back to AI overview and ask them what are the steps to form, for the scientific method, the first thing is asking a question. Well, I think asking questions is great. It helps us stay in that curious brain space. Remember, we want to ask ourselves what and how questions. We really want to avoid the why questions, which in the scientific method, we use why questions. Well, why questions are great when we're talking about inanimate things or animals, not humans. Why questions for relationships and communicating within those relationships are really dangerous. Okay, so let's try and avoid those why questions because why questions in relationships will lead to judgments that are a little bit premature. Then we want to do some background research. Background research for this is going to be what's happened in the past. And then maybe we need to ask ourselves, what conclusions have I developed that may not be true? Now, this is where you've got to be super honest with yourself because this is where we're going to say things like, my partner or my sister is doing this because they think or they feel or whatever. We don't know that. That is that filter that we are utilizing in our cognitive awareness to interpret information because somebody else's behavior has made us uncomfortable. And so that's where we want to kind of take a break from that. And then the next step in the scientific method is formulate a hypothesis. We don't want to do that yet because our filters are getting in the way of our ability to understand the intention of other people. Then we want to do these experiments according to the scientific method. No, we don't want to do experimentation. We want to ask ourselves more questions. This is why we're saying, hey, stay curious for longer. And so then our next step in the scientific method is analyze that data. So what I'm going to say is, as we're moving our hypotheses, we want to ask ourselves some questions, and then we want to go to that person and ask them why. Why are you doing this? I'm going to share before we draw a conclusion. Okay, so I'm kind of going all over the place. Let me slow down and back up. The scientific method says you ask a question, you gather some basic background data, you formulate a hypothesis, and then you experiment and you test that hypothesis, and then you analyze the data. The problem with that in relationships is that when I formulate a hypothesis, I'm going to test my data and I'm going to formulate conclusions based on my filter. That's not helpful. Instead, what I want to do is I want to ask myself the question. I want to gather some background information. Then I want to go to the people and I want to communicate. I'm going to say, and I'm going to utilize this, the story I'm telling myself, or this leads me to believe. You insert that, and then you ask that other person, is this accurate? Now, having said that, it's really common for that person, the other person that I'm trying to communicate with, to get really defensive and say, no, you're wrong. This is why we want to say, the story I'm telling myself, or my belief, or this leads me to believe this. Can you help me understand? That's going to open the doors for more communication. Then you're going to gather more data. You're going to say, hey, and you're going to check in with it often, over and over. You're going to repeat this cycle of curiosity over and over and over again. And as that behavior doesn't change or does change, that's when you're going to utilize your hypotheses and communicate your results. And what that means is I'm going to say, hey, I'm seeing this behavior over and over. We've talked about it before. It leads me to think this. I've brought that to your attention. I'm not seeing the behavioral change. What's getting in the way of that? And after a prolonged period of time with no behavioral change, that is when you make your conclusion as to what you might need to do in order to stay in the relationship, shift your own behavior, help them shift their behavior, or leave. And though that's a very important thing, is to remain in that cycle of curiosity where you're consistently gathering data, and then checking in with the other people around you, or gathering data about yourself and being really genuinely real with yourself and being honest with yourself is hard to do. I would say it's harder for me to be honest with myself than it is to be honest with other people. And so be honest with yourself. Hey, I'm responding in this way. What's going on for me? What's leading to this conclusion? Am I mind reading? Am I putting up mental health barriers? Or am I putting up barriers to keep people away so that I don't have to dip in to this uncomfortable place? I'm going to give you a little snippet of a story that I'm not going to go into in great detail. So there are holes in this story on purpose because I'm not allowed to talk about the whole story. But my sister, who appears as Evelyn in my book Trauma Bonded, recently told the courts that I'm abusing my child and filed a motion to try and take my child from me. Now, this is one of my kiddos, one of my special needs kiddos, who has a diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, and he needs a lot of medical care. I haven't spoken to my sister in like years. She has not seen my kiddo for 5.5 years, and all of a sudden she's coming out and saying these things. I really struggled in the beginning with saying, well, she's doing that because, and some of those conclusions I jumped to was to like please my parents, who are constantly trying to get back into my life. They aren't honoring those boundaries, which Read the book, you'll understand a little bit more about that. Another story that I was telling myself is she's trying to be the favorite child. She's trying to hurt me. She's trying to seek revenge. She's trying to all of these things. And it took me, I'm going to be honest, about 2 weeks before I was able to slow that way down and say, I have no idea why she's doing this. Her information is flawed. We are not abusing this child. We got investigated because of it, and everybody's like, no, this kiddo is safe. We have cameras in our house everywhere, y'all, because my kiddo has reactive attachment disorder. If you want to understand reactive attachment disorder a little bit better and what some parents go through when you're dealing with reactive attachment kiddos, you can go read the book. I think it's called But He Spit in My Coffee. If you look book Spit in My Coffee, it's the only book out there with that title. So go read that book if you want to know a little bit more about the day-to-day ins and outs of a kiddo with reactive attachment disorder. He goes to a special school where he assaults the staff on a regular basis. And because it's a special school with a lot of hospital interventions, that's how they're keeping him, other kiddos, and the staff safe. Like, these are regular occurrences going on. Beyond that, I can't share the details of that right now. But my sister's intervention really put our family in a difficult spot. My point is, I jumped to conclusions about her intention without the data. Now, 2 weeks later, what I can use the moving my hypotheses, this process that I just told you, is I have no idea why she's doing it, but it was really hurtful. And I'm really glad that here we are months later, and it's not going to negatively impact my family other than the stress that it caused when she did that. We are safe and we can move forward. Recognize that when you are in your amygdala survival brain, remaining curious is next to impossible. So step 1 is calm the fuck down. Step 2 is gather data, check it with reality, gather more data, check that with the individuals if it's safe, check that with the individuals that are involved. Again, my computer just said that I'm having trouble connecting, so I will repeat that one more time. So instead of jumping to conclusions and mind reading, what I want to do is get curious. I'm going to gather data, check it with reality-based thinking, check what you actually know and what you don't. Watch that clairvoyancy that we have a tendency to do. Then you're going to check in with the other person involved if it's safe. Gather more data, check in with the other people involved. Gather more data, check in with the other people involved, and over the course of a prolonged period of time, then you're going to make the conclusions as to what is in your best interest and the best interest of others. Again, remember, remaining flexible means remaining curious, and you want to move that hypothesis or maybe even eliminate it when it comes to relationships. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.